In the fourth episode of our ongoing collaboration with Central Square Foundation, we talk about building not just digital literacy, but also debunk common myths about artificial intelligence in classrooms and identify pathways for inclusive and scalable AI adoption. Recent advancements in AI have unlocked capabilities that hold immense potential to catalyze innovation in education. From intelligent assessments that offer real-time feedback to enhanced lesson planning, the potential of AI to transform education is immense. To get deeper insights into how this is going to happen, we will be joined by experts who have been working hard to make this a reality. The episode will air tomorrow, 17th of October. It will be available on our website, indianexpress.com, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Make sure to tune in. To listen to the first 3 episodes of the series, check out the links provided in the description. Now, on with the show. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to 3 Things, the Indian Express news show. Today on the show, we talk about an alleged 100 crore corruption scandal involving gun licenses which were issued in Jammu and Kashmir. We also give you the latest update in the case involving the suicide of a Dalit IPS officer from Haryana and why it has raised even more questions about the matter. But we begin today by talking about China's latest plan to reduce its emissions and what they mean for the global climate goals. Over the past year, most climate change conferences have ended with disappointing results, as several major countries appear to have pushed climate action down their list of priorities. And that is why what happened during the Special Climate Summit held alongside the UN General Assembly last month came as a surprise to some.
Under the 2015 Paris Agreement, every country is mandated to prepare and submit a climate action plan every 5 years.
That's the Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha who reported on this for the paper.
So every 5 years, you have to tell the international community what you are going to do on climate further to what you are already doing. So you have to keep updating your climate action plans every year. So every country is supposed to do that, every signatory to the Paris Agreement. So this is in the Paris Agreement itself. And these climate action plans are called Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs. This is just to emphasize the fact that these climate action plans are nationally determined so that every country determines on its own what its climate action plan would be. It is not assigned by someone else. So it is sort of a bottoms-up approach. Every country is free to decide what exactly it would have in its climate action plans.
So during the summit hosted by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, China announced its nationally determined contribution. President Xi Jinping, addressing the event via video conferencing, revealed plans to cut the country's greenhouse gas emissions by 7 to 10% by 2035 from its peak levels. In this segment, we speak to Amitabh about the significance of this announcement and what it means for the global fight against climate change. Amitabh, we are heading into the annual climate change conference COP30 in Brazil next month. Tell us, in light of that, how important is this announcement?
So, China is the largest emitter in the world. So any action that China takes would have a huge influence on, the global response to climate change. The other important part, why this is important is that for the first time, China actually announced that it is going to make absolute emission cuts, meaning it is going to reduce its emissions. It will let its emissions peak and then it will reduce its emissions from that peak value. It has given a target of 7 to 10% by 2035. Now, this is the first time that China has announced an absolute emission reductions. And going to COP30, this probably is one of the biggest announcements that would be under discussion at COP30 as well.
And Amitabh, how does this commitment compare with what China was doing earlier?
So what China was doing is very much what India has been doing in the 2025-2030 framework. So both China and India in the climate framework are identified as developing countries, right? And developing countries are not mandated to make direct emission cuts or absolute emission cuts. They can do proportional emission cuts. And that's what both India and China had been doing. So they said they were giving targets in the form of emissions intensity. So they were saying, we are not going to make reductions in our emissions. What we are going to do is we are going to slow down the growth of our emissions. So what exactly emissions intensity is? Emissions intensity is the amount of emissions that are generated per unit of GDP. So what they were essentially saying is that our GDPs would increase, but our emissions would not increase proportionately, so that we are making our economy more efficient and our relative emissions relative to the GDP would decline, but our absolute emissions would not decline. So a little bit of, those who are not very familiar with sort of jargons and the climate discussions might find it a little bit confusing, but this is what they were doing.
Also, can you break down this commitment for us and explain what does China mean when it says that it will reduce its emissions by 7 to 10% by the year 2035 from its peak levels? And also, what are its peak levels?
So now we don't know what the peak level is. The official numbers from China are not yet available, so we do not know when they are going to peak. But what China has said that whenever we are going to peak, whether it's 2027, 2030 or 31, so definitely before 2035. So whenever we are going to peak, from that level, we will make at least 7 to 10% emission reductions by 2035. So that's promise number one. The second promise that China has made, it has said that its emissions reductions would be economy-wide, meaning it will reduce emissions from all the sectors and not just specific sectors. Now, those who follow climate would understand that this is also an important point, because a lot of countries, when they talk about emissions reductions, they are only focused on certain sectors and do not want some other sectors like agriculture to be touched. So they don't want any sort of reductions to happen in agriculture, but that's a separate debate. But in any case, so China has said its emissions reductions would apply across the economy. So that is two. The third thing that China has said is that its share of non-fossil fuel energy in the total energy consumption would rise to 30% by 2035. So that's also a significant. So, what essentially China is saying that we would continue to deploy a lot of more renewables, and we would rely on these renewables more and more to drive our economy, so that our final energy consumption, whatever it is in 2035, at least 30% of that would be coming from non-fossil sources. And there is another promise that China has made, and that is that it will increase, solar and wind energy capacity to 3,600 gigawatts by 2035. Now, 3,600 gigawatts is a massive amount of energy. So that's more than 3 times the United States' current installed electricity capacity. So these are the 3 or 4 promises that China has made.
You mentioned that China is the world's biggest emitter. So does this new emission reduction target offer any real hope of the world meeting the temperature goals set under the Paris Agreement?
So if we just look at what the ask was, or what the ask is for 2030 globally, then whatever China is going to do by 2035, it doesn't move the needle at all in the 2030 framework. And in the 2030 framework, a time frame, we are nowhere close to be on that pathway for achieving 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. So we are nowhere even close to that path, that trajectory, which will make us achieve the 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees goal that is there in the Paris Agreement, at least in the 2030 time frame. And China is not going to do anything extraordinary in the 2030 time frame. So as far as by 2030 is concerned, there's nothing major, nothing significant is going to happen, which means we are going to remain on the trajectory that we are on currently, which is very, very far away from where we need to be to reach the 1.5 to 2 degrees target.
Right. And even though China is making a major commitment, The general reaction to China's announcement has been that it is too little too late. Why is that?
Yes, because the expectation was that China would do more. And one of the reasons was that in the last few years, at least, China has been amassing huge amounts of renewables. Every year, China has been deploying more solar and wind energy than the rest of the world combined. 300 gigawatts of renewable capacity every year for the last 2 years. So that's massive. What that meant was that once China is done doing this, once China decides to let its emissions peak, it would be able to reduce its emissions very fast because it has already built up the clean energy, this massive capacity of clean energy sources, that it would not require any fossil fuels, or it would require fossil fuels only for very limited kind of purposes, so that it would be able to reduce its emissions at a much faster rate than 7 to 10% that it has promised. And that is why that 7 to 10% doesn't seem impressive. A lot of people were expecting a much higher number. In fact, there have been studies which point out that China could actually do 30% reduction by 2035 instead of just 7 to 10%. And in fact, the study said that 30% is the minimum that is required to get the world back on the 1.5 or 2 degrees trajectory in the 2035 time frame. So from that point, it's been a little disappointing. But there is also assessments, a lot of observers saying that probably what China has promised is the bare minimum, and most likely it's going to overachieve its targets, considering that it has overachieved its targets earlier as well.
And Amitabh, you mentioned that China has been amassing so much renewables in the last few years. So wouldn't that turn the tide?
Yes. So as we discussed, that is what was expected. China, the amount of electricity capacity that it is creating, and from renewables, as we said, it is installing more renewable capacity every year than the rest of the world combined. So China already produces the largest amount of electricity in the world. It is the largest consumer of energy anywhere in the world, and far supersedes the United States, which is at the second place. So the expectation was that once you have that much of energy capacity or electricity capacity, you would be able to shift the trajectory pretty quickly. But what seems to have happened is that China's estimates of its own energy demand is much more than what the world was expecting it would need. So China thinks it would need much more energy going into that 2035, 2040 period than what a lot of studies projected China's demand would be. And that's why we are not. So even in 2035, we see China still needing fair bit of fossil fuels to continue to power its economy, whereas a lot of studies had projected that because it has so much of clean power now, the reliance on fossil fuels would only be minimal. But it seems the expectation of how much energy China would need, China's expectation is much more than what others were thinking it would need.
And Amitabh, we've been talking about China, but what about the United States, which is the world's second largest emitter, but historically the biggest one? We know that US had also pulled out of the Paris Agreement. But could China's announcement shame the United States into doing more on climate?
So that's highly unlikely, at least till this government is there in the United States. So as our listeners probably are very well aware, the United States has pulled out of Paris Agreement, so it is under no obligation to even submit its NDCs. But, before Donald Trump took office, the previous administration, the Biden administration, had already released its 2035 NDCs last year itself. But again, since the United States is no longer part of the Paris Agreement, it is under no compulsion to even meet those targets that were mentioned in the 2035 NDCs. Now, even without pulling out, even when the United States was part of Paris Agreement, the US has been one of the biggest laggards on climate action globally. As you pointed out, the US is the largest historical emitter by a great distance. So it has the largest responsibility to reduce emissions. But if you look at their emissions trajectory, it's almost flat. There has been no reduction between, say, 1990 to almost now, or 2019, 2020 levels. It's almost flat. It's just a very marginal reduction. Whereas, there have been other countries in Europe, for example, who have done much better. A lot of countries have done about 40 or 45% reductions, whereas the United States is almost flat. So it's not just they're pulling out of the Paris Agreement. Even historically, they have been very, very slow they have been the biggest laggards on climate action till now. And till this administration is there, their policy on climate is pretty well stated. They don't believe in this international climate system in any case. So I don't think China taking or claiming the leadership role on climate is likely to have any influence on the decisions of the United States, at least not till this government is in the administration. But the fact is, if you keep the United States out of the equation, then again, the climate targets, the Paris Agreement targets that we were talking about, it's very, very difficult to be achieved. It's almost a no-starter.
And next, we shift our focus to Jammu and Kashmir, where an administrative probe into gun licenses has revealed a 100 crore rupees corruption scandal. Back in 2012, when Jammu and Kashmir was still a state, gun licenses were issued routinely by district magistrates and deputy commissioners. This was a bureaucratic process governed by paperwork, police verification, and state oversight. But between 2012 and 2016, this system quietly turned into what investigators now call one of the largest arms license scandals in the country. During this period, over 2.74 lakh gun licenses were allegedly issued to people who were neither residents of Jammu and Kashmir nor posted there. And a majority, the CBI says, went to personnel of the armed and paramilitary forces.
Jammu and Kashmir was a state then, and it enjoyed the privileges available to it under Article 370 at that time, because 370 got abrogated in 2019.
This is the Indian Express's Arun Sharma, who reported on the story for the newspaper.
So, under the provisions of 370, these licenses were to be issued only to the people belonging to Jammu and Kashmir. The only exception was Defence Forces personnel who came from other parts of the country and were posted in Jammu and Kashmir. They could have got the license because they were defence personnel. That was the exception. Now, what happened between this period, 2012 to 2016, some of the district magistrates, I will say, they are alleged to have issued licenses not only to the defence forces personnel, but even to the private parties as well, and through certain gun horses, the gun dealers. Somewhere in 2021, Rajasthan ATS arrested some people with gun licenses issued from a district in Jammu and Kashmir. And from there, the lid was taken off. And in 2021, the matter was referred because the gun licenses were issued to people who hailed from different parts of the country. So in 2021, the matter was handed over to CBI. And since then, CBI is investigating the matter.
Now, to break down the CBI's investigation so far and understand what lies ahead, my colleague Ichha Sharma talks to Arun in this segment.
Arun, we understand that right now the MHA has asked the CBI for concrete evidence and a money trail linking these district magistrates to the alleged gun dealers. So, could you explain why is this question about the money trail so crucial?
The question is crucial because in the meeting, the letter issued to CBI director post their meeting chaired by MHA officials on August 27, they have pointed out certain things, citing an instance that one officer has been accused of parking 12 to 18 lakh in his mother's bank account, and another deposited 2.8 lakh in the account of two women around demonetization. But issue is, was this money given by the gun dealers? Does it prove the connection between gun dealers and the concerned district magistrate? Because district magistrate is a senior IAS officer, and he may have saved that money or deposited that money in his bank account, in his mother's account, or may have given money to someone on loan, because 2.8 lakh is not a huge amount for an IAS officer. So they wanted to be doubly sure before they give sanction to prosecute them. They want to be doubly sure that there is money trail between connecting the IAS officers and the gun dealers.
Right. And so what kind of evidence has the CBI gathered so far?
They have questioned a judicial clerk who were attached with the district magistrates who handled those files. They have recorded the statements of the gun dealers also, middlemen also. In a number of cases, the officers belonging to the J&K administrative services, charge sheets have been filed against them. They have sort of evidence based on their official statements and their bank accounts that during that period between 2012 to 2016, when they were serving as district magistrate, the money was deposited in their account. And in some cases, they say the money was deposited by the gun horses through the middlemen or through the officials. These kind of evidences they have. The deposits in the bank accounts of the district magistrates during that period and statements of the people who were questioned by CBI during investigation.
Okay, so the investigation has already led to charge sheets against several KS officers, judicial clerks, and gun dealers, right? So why has prosecution sanction become such a sticking point in this case?
Basically, the officials who belonged to Jammu and Kashmir administrative services, the sanction was given to them by the state government. And judicial clerks sanction was given to the CBI by the state government. Only because the IAS officers, the central government had to take decision. So they are asking for more evidence, I will say. But in one case, they have already given sanction against one IAS officer, Rajiv Ranjan, last year in the same case.
Right. And Arun, talk about why is this not being considered just a scam, but a national security concern?
Yes, because the number of guns issued is quite alarming during the period, given the security situation in Jammu and Kashmir since 1989-90. And what officials say of the record that in most of the cases, the addresses of the people are fake, the identities are fake, or their addresses are fake. Even in some cases, the records are not available. The background of the people was not checked against to whom the gun licenses were issued. How many of them have purchased the weapon? The weapons are not just double barrel or single barrel guns. The weapons purchased by these licenses have the value ranging from 10,000-15,000 to several lakhs as well. Means a number of them may have purchased sophisticated weapons. So one can purchase a semi-automatic gun, pistol, unlicensed. It also runs into over 1 lakh. But idea is one must know that who are these people who purchased these guns. And one more thing I will tell you, that after 2 years, 3 years or 5 years, these gun licenses have to be renewed. Now, in most of the cases, because the CBI is conducting investigation, and records pertaining to these licenses issued during this period lie with the CBI, there is every possibility that a number of people who got licenses during that period may not be getting them renewed now. Because where they will renew them? The records are with the CBI. And the people, they belong to other states. They had to come to Jammu and Kashmir and get the licenses renewed from concerned district magistrate, from the concerned district where it was issued.
And so given this, can the administration take any steps to cancel the fraudulent licenses?
No. First of all, you have to know that where are the licenses? Even if you want to cancel the license, cancellation doesn't mean that you just issue an order and cancel the license. In that event, all these 2.74 lakh or 2.64 lakh weapons issued so far will be rendered illegal with just one stroke of the pen. And many of them may be genuine licenses. So you cannot cancel all those licenses in just one go. Yes, you have to screen these licenses.
And lastly, Arun, what happens next in the investigation? Like, what are the next steps they are planning to take?
So far as CBI is concerned, they say we have completed our investigation. No, the matter has to be challenged in the court by presenting charge sheets against the accused. So far as officers from J&K services are concerned, or the lower staff from Jammu and Kashmir government is concerned, they have already filed charge sheets against that. The CBI has also filed a charge sheet against one of the IAS officer, Rajiv Rindal, last year. Now only these 8 officers are left, and it all depends on the Union Home Ministry whether they give the sanction, prosecution sanction or what. If they don't give, the CBI can't challan that.
And finally, we shift our focus to the case involving the suicide of an officer from Haryana. A week ago, senior IPS officer Y. Puran Kumar was found dead in his home in Chandigarh with a gunshot wound. The 2001 batch officer, who was serving as Additional Director General of Police in Haryana, left behind a 9-page note detailing years of caste-based harassment and humiliation within the police department. Now, days later, an assistant sub-inspector in Rohtak also allegedly died by suicide, leaving a note that accused Kumar himself of corruption, deepening the tragedy and sparking questions. The Indian Express's Varinder Bhatia reports that Kumar's note described a steady slide in his career since 2020 when he visited a temple in his official capacity. After the visit, he received a formal letter questioning the legitimacy of his visit from the then Director General of Police, whom he had named in the note. Kumar, who belonged to a scheduled caste, alleged that he was humiliated over the incident and filed a complaint under the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act, but said no action followed. Over the next few years, he claimed he was transferred repeatedly to insignificant posts, denied promotions, and even had his performance appraisals tampered with. While serving as Inspector General in Sirsa in 2022, he said his decision to act against an unauthorized temple construction inside police lines further angered his seniors, and an internal inquiry was filed against him. Bhatia writes that in early 2024, he was shifted to the telecommunications department to head the Dial 112 emergency service, a posting he described as punishment. That April, he returned his official car in protest, alleging caste-based discrimination in how vehicles were allotted. By September 2025, he was transferred again, this time to the Police Training College in Rohtak, widely seen as a demotion. Adding to his stress, a constable who had worked as his personal security officer was arrested on extortion charges just days before his death. Kumar's wife, IAS officer Amneet P. Kumar, alleged that the case was a part of a deliberate effort to tarnish his image. Bhatia further reports that after his death, Amneet lodged a formal complaint naming 13 senior officers. Chandigarh Police has since registered an FIR for abetment to suicide and under provisions of the SC/ST Act. And National Commission for Scheduled Castes has taken suo motu notice. As protests spread across Haryana, political leaders including Rahul Gandhi, Chirag Paswan and Chief Minister Nayab Singh Saini have visited the family, promising justice and accountability. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's episode was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Ichha Sharma, Shashank, Bhargava and me, Niharika, Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.